started my career in the nonprofit world like most people do through years of volunteer work and just personal interest and passion in what it is that we do. I volunteered with many different kinds of organizations growing up, from promoting fair trade shade coffee and farmers cooperatives in Costa Rica to working with schools planting trees to learn about how climate change affects different species as they grow. But I realized that my interest had always circulated around trying to understand the relationships that we have with the environment and the subsequent impacts that those relationships bring about. And I began volunteering with the OceanWise program shortly after I completed my master's from the University of Guelph in sustainable seafood in North America. And I studied this because I thought it was both fascinating as well as important. I wanted to understand how one of the most complicated supply chains on the planet, which has thousands of ports, spanning international borders, that's importing, exporting, harvesting, producing, processing, a very important and vital protein resource that a lot of the world's poor are dependent upon when they live in coastal communities. I wanted to understand how this related to us and how we related to it. I think that the oceans, our connections to them, and our dependence upon them for our own survival is something that needs to be highlighted and further understood, and it's why I'm excited to talk to you all. But really today I'm here to tell you a story. It's a story about these relationships, about culture, livelihoods, trends, as well as our impacts upon the environment. But to put it more simply, it's a story about food. So as you can see here, there you go. So what you see here is known as a gooseneck barnacle. So for the marine biologists in the audience, you may associate this more with curious-looking things that grow in tide pools in British Columbia, but rather than something that you would actually be eating. For texture, I would describe gooseneck barnacles as a love child between calamari, oysters, and those fruit-filled gummies that you used to eat when you were little, the gushers. Yeah. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Before I can get into the actual story of the gooseneck barnacle, I need to provide you with a bit of context and understanding of the OceanWise program and how we are connected to these odd-looking, delectable treats. So, OceanWise is a sustainable seafood recommendation body. We originally started out as just an idea. So if you see the picture all the way on the left, that gentleman's name is Rob Clark, and he is a chef in British Columbia in the city of Vancouver. So he approached the Vancouver Aquarium because he wanted to know how it would be possible for him to communicate to his customers that were coming into his restaurant that he was making the effort to source sustainable seafood. So what he did was he talked to us, and we developed a program in which we could find ways to promote sustainable seafood and promote it to consumers by using chefs. So from that simple idea back in 2005, we've grown into a national program with offices in Vancouver and Toronto, where I'm from, and most recently a part-time staff member in Halifax. And we partner with people from all across Canada, so that's from BC all the way over to Newfoundland. The OceanWise program works directly with restaurants, markets, food services, and suppliers to make sure that they have the most current scientific information regarding sustainable seafood, and to also help them make ocean-friendly buying choices. This information that we use is based upon assessments that have been created by the Seafood Watch program in the United States, based out of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And as you can see in this image up here, there you go, the options are highlighted on menus or in display cases if it's a retail location, which then makes it easier for consumers to make an ocean-friendly choice. So you would go in, as you can see in this picture, not all of the options have the OceanWise symbol next to them, so you can decide if you want to make an ocean-friendly choice or if you want to eat something that maybe isn't as good. But it's up to you. It's your choice. We don't judge. And these people up here are what we refer to as our ambassadors. I apologize for showing a picture predominantly of men at a women's conference. However, the reality is within the seafood industry and within the culinary industry, it's a very male-dominated space. Oddly enough, the OceanWise team is made up completely of women, so we're just a bunch of ladies lost in a sea of men. But why am I showing you pictures of chefs? So chefs are our ambassadors because chefs have a unique position within the supply chain. We think it's really important to educate consumers, and we actually spend a lot of time creating educational materials for consumers. However, in addition to that, if we take it one step higher, chefs have the ability not only to influence food trends, but also to give options to their customers when they come into that space. So if a chef wants to, they can partner with us and completely have everything on their menu sustainably sourced. So when customers come into their restaurant, it's not really a matter of choice because they're already making a good choice by going to that person. And it's these choices that chefs are making, which brings us back to our original story of the little gooseneck barnacle. So a few years ago, Oceanwise began to notice that gooseneck barnacles were popping up on some very trendy restaurant menus in BC. We also had chefs coming up to us and they were asking, what is this gooseneck barnacle? Is it a sustainable option? Can I be putting it on my menu? If I'm 100% Oceanwise, is it okay to put it on there? Customers are asking us questions, and they wanted to know if it was sustainable. As a scientifically based organization, like I mentioned before, we can't make a recommendation until we have an assessment that's been completed on a particular fishery. Gooseneck barnacles, like many other dynamic fisheries within Canada, are a very small scale, regionally specific fishery, and we did not have an assessment for them. This fishery is a Nuu-chah-nulth First Nation fishery, and it's located in Clayoquot Sound, BC. And it's so small, it actually only employs about 6 people. So really, really tiny. Really, really difficult to gain access to that kind of information, especially when we're dealing with assessments of large-scale fisheries. Unlike something like the Pacific tuna fishery, which brings in about 3 million tons of tuna per year, gooseneck barnacles only produce about 4,000 kilograms per year. We realize as an organization that there are options within Canada and that are important to our food culture as well as the livelihoods of Canadians that we could not make a recommendation on because we didn't have the capacity to do so. And we thought that this was a really huge problem. So in order to solve this problem and address this kind of niche market, we decided to hire a small-scale fisheries assessment specialist who would then be able to go to these small-scale fisheries and determine the sustainability by conducting assessments in-house ourselves. And her first project, gooseneck barnacles. So Loren's assessment included 48 designated harvest rocks where these filter feeder crustaceans would attach themselves. It's a really interesting fishery, and one of the things that makes it so sustainable is that the people that are part of this fishery have to know a lot about this space because it's quite dangerous. You have these coastal harvest rocks. They have to be opportunistic and wait and understand the tides. So as the tides go out, they jump in their boats, they drive around, they climb onto the rocks, and with handheld tools, they hand remove all of the gooseneck barnacles, as many as they can before the tide comes back in. Oops. So because this method of hand harvesting is so highly selective and there is such a great management plan in place, gooseneck barnacles are now considered to be an Oceanwise recommended option. And we didn't stop there. From the time that we've hired Loren on as our small-scale fisheries assessment specialist, we've also assessed Chedabucto Bay shrimp from Nova Scotia, giant Pacific octopus from British Columbia, and most recently Arctic char from Cambridge Bay up in Nunavut, which is a pretty exciting one. And we're always on the lookout for new small-scale fisheries to assess because we want to stimulate and increase access to sustainable seafood within North America. For example, we're currently doing assessments on eastern and western sea cucumber because that's something that's really popular within Asian communities. And we're also looking at whelks from the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So by being an Oceanwise recommended option, partner restaurants can now seek out these particular fisheries because they know that there's science to support that it's an ocean-friendly choice. So what makes an option Oceanwise recommended? As you can see here, we have 4 criteria that we use to determine the sustainability of a fishery. And they are, species has to be from a healthy and abundant stock. The species has to have limited bycatch associated with that fishery. Bycatch would be the catch of non-target species that are often tossed back into the sea, dead or dying, and add up to be quite a large amount of waste in terms of global fisheries. The fishery has to be effectively managed. And there also has to be limited habitat damage associated with that fishery. So that often has to do with the method in which these fish are being harvested or caught. For example, if you're going to use a bottom trawler, oftentimes that scrapes and ruins the sea floor, which is important habitat for juvenile fish in order to grow and be protected from other predators. In addition to wild stocks, we also have 8 criteria that we use to determine the sustainability of aquaculture practices, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to get into those. But I do want to point out that oftentimes people assume aquaculture is not a sustainable way to harvest. Aquaculture actually produces 50% of the seafood that we eat globally. So a majority of you have probably had, if you've had fish this week, it's probably been aquaculture produced, most likely. But the way in which it's produced is what determines its sustainability. For example, there's a lot of really great technologies that are currently coming out. One of them is closed containment recirculating aquaculture systems. So these are completely controlled environments that are separate from water bodies, and they're an excellent way to control the space and therefore control and minimize risk, making it a much more sustainable option. By keeping our ears to the ground and paying attention to trends and engaging with all actors across the supply chain, from chefs writing menus in BC to oyster farmers on the east coast of Canada, we've grown to gain a greater influence within the Canadian market. Overfishing, ocean acidification, and coral bleaching are all real issues that are having impacts on ocean health. And we think that utilizing the chef as a means to spread the message and ensure that food trends are leading towards a direction of sustainable seafood is one of the best ways to give justice to small fisheries like gooseneck barnacles. Thank you.